So I'm Xinfang. I'm an assistant professor in the Center for Sustainable Cooling at the University of Birmingham. So I'm going to introduce you a bit about myself, a bit about what we're doing in the center, and then just to reflect from there. So the topic I'm going to talk about the research is about zero-emission food cold chain. So this cover a few different projects that we do in the center, both in UK, EU, and also in global South. So personal journey about myself. I started here from my PhD, but if we go back before my PhD, I can recall similar things about what actually Patrick said. So my original background from my undergraduate is about economics and accounting. So I did the chartered certification of accountant and trying to find a job in accounting, which didn't really came through. So I pursued further with my master's study on economics, and then I did my master's dissertation in energy economics, which then started with of my interest in coming into the energy research area. And so then I pursued a PhD at in relation to energy at the center, Tyndall Center for Climate Change Research at the University of Birmingham. So my PhD looked at understanding the high energy consumption within UK households. So if you know about the 20%, 80% rule that in general, 20% of the population, they emit 80% of the total global emissions. So that was the motivation of my PhD thesis, to trying to identify what's actually driving those 20% of people to use a lot more energy and emit a lot more than the others. So in this PhD, I used the interdisciplinary approach. So no longer only look at economics and the data and the quantitative set, but involve social science, look at behaviors and social practice, and go to collect qualitative data from interviews and focus groups and so on. So this then led to my overall research approach that I take, which is look at very interdisciplinary mixed methods and whole system approach to look at energy, cooling, and emissions. So then from my PhD, I started to work in University of Birmingham, first in the Birmingham Center of Energy Storage. So looked at different projects on energy storage, again, through the interdisciplinary approach, look at technological innovation system, look at capabilities approach of how energy storage meet people's well-being needs and development needs, and then look at multi-level governance, both centralized scheme and how the role of local government to support energy storage. And then I moved to the next role at the new Center for Sustainable Cooling. So in this center, we look at lots of different aspects of cooling and cold chain, both in the global north and global south. So look at the cold chain for food and vaccine storage and distribution. So as you know from the pandemic, most of the vaccines, they need to be maintained at the low temperature, from logistics to storage. So we do those projects in Bangladesh, in India, and in Africa, and also to look at food. So cold chain is very essential for reducing food waste, food loss from the post-harvest management through the logistics to consumers. So my current role started from last year is as assistant professor, and to have more leadership role in the different research projects in the center. So then moving on to the topic I'm going to talk about, which is about food cold chain. So why is it important? As I mentioned a few points, so cold chain is the backbone of our local and global food networks. It's very important for maintaining food quality and safety, to reduce food loss and food waste. And also it covers the whole we cover the whole food supply chain from farm to the fork, like post-harvest management through logistics to consumers. And this involves different types of cold chain facilities, from fridge freezer to refrigerated truck to cold box, cold rooms across the different stage. But we know that the problem is that conventional food cold chains, they are very energy intensive and they often use very high GWP refrigerants. So that's a big factor for emissions. And they are also very often based on inefficient equipment, cause less efficiency of the energy use, and also emerging challenges of increasing demand of food supply chain, considering the global food system transition and through the pandemic, people are changing their ways of shopping and the ways of cooking and storing food, and also be prepared for any future shocks, like any more pandemics that could influence people's way of shopping and eating food, and also diet change as well. So the importance, if we have a zero emission food cold chain, would provide great benefit to both meeting climate change targets and also global Kigali Amendment targets, and meeting sustainable development goals as well, for reducing zero hunger, to achieve zero hunger, and reducing poverty as well. So globally, the food system accounts for about 30% of total energy consumption and 20% of greenhouse gas emissions. This was old data, so now it's a lot more. And in the UK itself, we also have a large amount of emissions from the UK food sector. And given that the food industry in the UK is the largest manufacturer in the UK, so it's very important to look at reducing the emissions in this sector. So it could benefit the rural economies, especially in Global South, can provide farmers with new opportunities if they can generate more income and reduce their loss of harvest. It could also improve people's social well-being by providing people more affordable way of preserve food and sell food with higher price, because they will have a better quality and better nutrition. And then this could enhance both food security and energy security. So food security, in the case of UK, we import a lot of fruit and vegetables from Global South. So if we could reduce food loss and waste in the Global South, then that could help with security in the UK as well. And in terms of energy security, so if we could make the cooling system more efficient, and also the stored cooling could then be used to generate energy to provide other services. So that would help energy security as well. So the projects we are doing at the center in relation to food cold chain, there are UK ones funded by UKIRC and EPSRC, EU ones funded by the Horizon 2020, and also in the Global South, we are building initially a center in Africa, Center of Excellence for Sustainable Cooling, and now a center in India as well. And we look at the design of community cooling hub that as an integrated system to provide both cooling and cold chain for food, vaccine in those villages, but also to act as a thermal comfort space for people to use during heat waves, especially for vulnerable groups. Okay, so the approach that I use for most of my research is actually similar to what Lan said. It's a problem driven. So I don't just focus on particular approach to solve our problems, but it depends on what problem I look at, and then we develop solutions towards it. So just to mention one of the center I mentioned, this is the African Center of Excellence for Sustainable Cooling and Cold Chain. So the center was just visited by the COP President Alok Sharma this week. They're having the CHOGM conference in Rwanda. So he visited the African Center of Excellence for Cooling. And as he highlighted here as well. So this center is a demonstration of how we can work together to help tackle the rising emissions and keep alive of the goal to limit global temperature rise. And cooling and refrigeration are the fastest growing source of greenhouse gas emissions in the world, in the warming world, especially in developing countries. But this challenge also gives us the opportunity to develop innovative, energy efficient technologies of the future through combining and integrating demand and supply of cooling. So this is a map to show the center in Africa. So this is based in the campus of University of Rwanda. and this is the hub of the center. Then we are developing other spoke as demonstration in other locations across Africa as well. So it's the program is developed and supported by governments of Rwanda and UK. And we work with United Nations Environmental Program and also a consortium of leading UK universities, including, as you see in the logo down there, so Heriot-Watt University, Cranfield University, and London South Bank University, and so on. So not going into details, just show you this center is going to cover a list of different areas from a center for research and development to demonstrate technologies. So we have a list of industry partners to come and test their technologies. We also look at business models, so servitization-based models to reduce capital cost for example, for small farmers who can hardly afford buying those equipment, but they can pay to use the cooling service as they need it. And also to use the hub as a knowledge transfer hub to train the farmers and users on how they could use and maintain those facilities. So this is just show you the other locations of the spoke I mentioned about. We're going to develop them as different demonstration sites to use the approach and technologies that we develop in the African Center. And plus, there's also a large land area that we are going to look at to develop a smart farm alongside the campus to look at integrated sustainable food system from soil to people's plates. So the smart farm is going to really have digitalization system to check the supply and demand, to balance them and to improve the efficiency of the whole system. And then overall, what we do in all the projects in the centers is to use a whole system approach for the zero emission cold chain. So the first step is on the left. So the first step, we look at needs-driven data collection. So we look at what are the drivers of the cold chain for now and up to 2050. So these drivers could come from all different aspects, from climate change, temperature rise, how would that affect the farming practice, to demographic data, what's the population change, what's the aging transformation and social transition, and then look at industry, how industry is transforming according to both how consumers is going to demand them, and also technology driven, and then look at also energy source, renewable energy, energy storage technologies, have electricity is connected with transport, how heating, waste heat can be used to generate cooling, and then also look at social cultural parameters about how these cooling services actually fit into people's local context and practice. So then once we look at the data to trying to assess them, then what would be the needs and demand of cooling in the future, then we design the sustainable cold chain solution, which will meet different sustainable development goals as well. So we want to optimize the cold chain design that we look at. We try to reduce demand, reduce cooling demand by, for example, reducing waste. And then we try to look at how to improve the system efficiency and also aggregate demand and supply. So for example, whether we could use the cooling hubs to both for cool food and vaccine during pandemics. So for example, yeah, if we have another pandemic, we would suddenly need a lot of cooling and cold chain for vaccine distribution. So that if we have those shared capacity and supply of cooling from those in the food sector, then we can improve the whole efficiency of the system. And then once we decide the best efficiency way to design the cooling and cold chain solution, we then look at on the right about the different interventions that are needed to deliver this solution. So look at how it would be accepted by the public, how it will fit fit into their social practice about how they live their everyday life, and then how would we train the users and the farmers to use those facilities, and look at how government and the policy support could help to make it happen, and then the sustainable business models and finance that could reduce the initial cost of the users so they can afford using them. And then just add a bit more detail as the first step. So the first step on the left, as I mentioned, is about looking at the needs of the cooling and the cold chain. So for this step, we use a needs assessment model framework. And the objective is to understand what the food supply chain may look like in the future and the implications of greenhouse gas emissions, and then to assess what the changing cooling needs of our food industry would be, and then identify big areas of risk and win about different scenarios towards their emission cold chain. So we're going to be based on IPCC guidelines to look at both historical estimation of the emission and then develop the model to address black swan events about anything might happen in the future, and then to achieve the net zero goal of the UK. So some of the upcoming issues that we're going to look at, for example, we'll look at the changes of transportation system. So if you look at the logistics, which relate to the change in supermarkets as well. So for example, like Morrison's, they're going to close about 40% of their physical stores, and that would change the way that logistics work. So people would have more instant shopping from small shops rather than going to supermarkets as a weekend big shopping. And then we also consider about advanced technology development, how people change their diet and shopping and cooking practice, and also political issues is, for example, like Brexit, how that would impact the import and export of food. And then again, that will change the logistics and demand of cooling. 2 minutes. 2 minutes, okay. So the approach we use is to understand the business as zero emissions, then identify the drivers of the change of the food cold chain, and then understand the impact of drivers, how likely the drivers is going to happen, and also the interlink between the different drivers. So the changes of people's behavior might link to the changes of demographic changes, and then that might also link to how technology development is driven the changes of people's behaviors. So, as a first step, we look at identifying the main drivers across the different categories, and under each category, we identify detailed drivers, for example, like temperature rise, a change of diet, and so on. And then the next, we look at development of road metrics to score the drivers. So which drivers have a highest impact on the food cold chain, and then identify the biggest drivers to develop a model focusing on those for scenarios to reduce the food cold chain emissions. This is just a diagram to show you our model will be first based on the boundary conditions and the selected food categories from vegetables to meat to fish to dairy, and then to look at the cold chain components from post-harvest cold rooms to logistics to retail warehouse, and then design the model from that. So this is similar to last one, that's how we're going to look at different sectors and different components of the food cold chain, and then how we design mitigation strategies to meet future needs as well as reducing emissions. So overall, we are going to look at different scenarios, how we might be able to reduce the emissions and develop the model that can be flexible to address any black swan events in the future, and then look at the trajectories of the sector from the different components, and then develop a whole holistic model that could consider the different aspects. So it's a lot of work. That's why we're having those projects as a 4-year projects, and we're now in our first year, so there's still a lot more work to do. Yeah, thank you.